I do.
State your name, please, ma'am.
McClendon Garrett. That's
All right.
McLendonGarrett.
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. You can have a seat. Now, Ms. Garrett, I'm going to refer to you as your professional title, Dr. Garrett, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you please explain to the jury how you're currently employed?
I work for the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities.
And what do you do for, well, tell the jury a little bit about what the Department of Behavioral Health and Disabilities is.
So it's an overall department in Georgia.
Oh.
Sorry about that.
The sound wasn't on.
Sorry.
It is the department in Georgia that oversees mental health services. It covers a variety of things like outpatient services, hospitals, and also the part that I'm involved in is forensic services. So my job is to go in and do court-ordered mental health evaluations.
And those court-ordered mental health evaluations, are those typically for defendants that are facing criminal charges in the jury?
They are all for defendants who are facing criminal charges.
Typically, how long have you worked at BBHDD?
For about 8 years.
And was that your first job out of school?
It was.
In psychology, I guess I should be specific.
Yes, it was my first psychological job.
Okay, we'll get to that in a few minutes. And what did you do, or what have you also done while you've been working with BBHDD?
I have a private practice on the side, but I can't do any state court or superior court cases in Georgia for conflict of interest, so I do federal cases.
Okay, and those federal cases that you handle, are those similar to the ones you handle with your work as DBHDD?
Typically they're a little different. In those cases, I'm usually doing mitigation evaluations. That's looking at what kind of psychological factors were involved in the person's background that may have influenced their behaviors. So it's not about whether they were competent or whether they were insane, but whether there's any psychological factors that should be considered at sentencing.
Okay, so not specific responsibility evaluations or competency evaluations as you conduct?
Not as frequently.
Okay, but have you had a chance to do some of those?
I've done
in the
some
federal
competency evaluations, but I haven't done any criminal responsibility evaluations in federal court.
Okay, and do you have any other work that you do in the field of psychology?
Not at this time.
Okay, all right.
I did do police fitness for duty type evaluations.
Okay, you did do that previously, but not doing that
But I'm
currently.
not doing it any longer.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your educational background, if you may.
I got my undergraduate degree in psychology from Duke back in 1998. Then I went to law school at the University of Arizona. I graduated from law school in 2003 and came back to Georgia and practiced law here in Georgia for about 8 years before returning to graduate school out in Oregon at Pacific University, where I got a master's in and a doctorate PsyD in clinical and forensic psychology in 2016.
So you're telling this jury that after 6 years of practicing law, you did not want to continue doing that?
I did not.
Okay. You might have to explain that to the rest of us here. When you, how long did it take you to get your, it's a PsyD, is that what it's referred
It's a
to?
doctoral degree in psychology.
Okay. And how long did it take you to obtain that degree?
I had 4 years of coursework and then a year of practicum that I did after I completed the coursework. That was a full-time placement at Georgia Regional Hospital, Atlanta. And then I went and did a full year of internship that specialized in forensics at a hospital in Maryland called Springfield Hospital Center. After I completed that, I was able to get my degree, and then I spent another year there doing a postdoctoral degree education, also specifically in forensics. So I spent 2 years total at Springfield Hospital Center.
Okay. And is that similar to a medical doctor that works in the emergency room that has residencies and things like that?
So it's mandatory. The internship is mandatory for the degree. The postdoc is not mandatory, but it's recommended, especially if you want to go into a specialty area like forensics.
And you did that because that's what you wanted to do, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any current license or certifications that you hold as a psychologist?
I'm licensed to practice psychology in the state of Georgia.
Okay. And that covers both clinical settings and forensic settings?
It's a general license, yeah.
Okay. And how long have you had that license?
Since 2017.
And do you have any annual requirements to retain your license, testing, or?
We don't have any testing requirements. We do have annual requirements. Well, actually, every other year we have to have 40 hours of continuing education. So that's done through conferences, webinars, consultation meetings, things like that.
Okay. And you are up to date on all of your annual training requirements?
I am. We just renewed in December.
Okay.
Well, it's renewed in December, but I've already done it.
Okay. Can you explain to the jury what psychology is?
Psychology generally is just sort of the study of the mind.
And what type of, is there any type of diagnostic testing that you do when you are evaluating an individual?
There's a variety of different diagnostics that people can do. It really depends on the specific situation. So if you have a more specific question, I would answer.
So I was going to ask you a little about the difference between clinical psychology and forensic psychology. So what do you do in a clinical psychological setting?
In a clinical psychological setting, you would, at a minimum, have a clinical interview, which is where you gather information about the person's background, what kinds of things have happened to them, what kinds of things they've done, their education, and their symptom presentation if they have any symptoms. If there are specific symptoms you're concerned about or specific things they're worried about, like some people want to get an assessment of their cognitive function or some people want to get a diagnosis. So then there are specific tests that can be used for each of those different kinds of questions, and you tailor what tests you're using based on what their concern is, what the referral question is.
And how does that compare or contrast to the area of forensic psychology?
In that way, it's pretty similar. You still are tailoring everything to what the specific referral question is. The biggest difference are sort of in relational issues. If you're a clinical psychologist, you're there for that person. You're trying to help that person. You're trying to be their support. And so you have a different view. They're your client. You believe what they say. You don't have any real reason to question what they're telling you because they're coming to you for help. In a forensic category, they're not your client. The person that you're interviewing is not your client. Usually the person is an attorney or a judge or somebody else other than the person who is speaking to you. And because they have court cases typically or things like that they have to deal with, you have to be more mindful of the fact that they may have an agenda. So you're not taking everything that they say as gospel. You don't just accept the things that you say. You do a lot more on the lines of looking at records and looking at other things to try and to see if what they say is consistent with what has been seen by other people.
Is it fair to say that a clinical psychologist is more in the lines of a therapist? Someone
Yes.
that helps someone through their specific diagnosis?
Yes, that's correct.
And as a forensic psychologist, you are taking the role more as an objective observer, considering not only what that person tells you, correct, but what also you might look at as other collateral sources and evaluating the circumstances of what happened.
That's correct. And we don't do any therapy at all. It would be unfair to the person you're interviewing to pretend like you're a therapist. So we make it very clear up front, we're not your therapist, we're independent. Because if they start believing that you're their therapist, they will interact with you in a different way, and they may come to believe that you're on their side and tell you things that they wouldn't otherwise tell you, and that's not fair. So our job is to be independent and neutral and just reach the best conclusion we can.
And ma'am, are you a member of any professional organizations in your area of psychology?
The sort of standard ones, the American Psychological Association and the Georgia Psychological Association.
Okay. And what about any articles or studies? Have you been involved in publishing anything in these areas?
Not really. I'm more of a hands-on practitioner than a researcher. I have done some presentations on violence, risk, and aggression, and on grooming behaviors. When I talk about grooming, we did a presentation on how sort of predators will bring in, it's usually considered in sex crimes where people will bring in girls to be prostitutes and they groom them to that process. So there's a process of treating them very kindly and helping them out and being their savior, and then exerting control and putting them on the streets and making them do things. So we did I did a presentation for the American Association of Forensic Psychologists that was based on research about grooming like that.
Okay. And how about testifying in court? I assume you've testified in court before, is that right?
I have.
How many times do you believe you've testified?
Not many. Maybe 50.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of the number of times you've testified either for the state or for the defense in a case?
It would be roughly 50-50.
Okay. And as each of those times that you have testified, have you been tendered as an expert in the field of either clinical psychology or forensic psychology?
I have.
Okay. Judge, at this time I'm going to move to tender Dr. Garrett as an expert in the areas of forensic psychology, clinical psychology specifically, and I guess specifically on conducting and completing competency and criminal responsibility evaluations.
Any objection? Okay.
All right, so you talked a little bit about a forensic psychology, the difference between clinical and forensic psychology generally. What are the specific steps that you go through when you generally conduct a forensic psychological examination like the ones you would have conducted here?
So I will go and meet the person wherever they are, in the detention center or a hospital or their attorney's office, wherever, and conduct a clinical interview. Spend a lot of time speaking to them about their background, about their mental health symptoms, and about how they're doing at the time of the evaluation. So you're trying to get sort of a full picture of the person from, we start out with where were you born, all the way up to how are you doing today. And then depending on what the referral question is, there would be other sections. So if I were doing a competency evaluation, I would then ask them questions about their understanding of what happens in court, their ability to describe their case, their ability to think clearly about what their legal options are, and their ability to communicate that information to their attorney.
When you, I guess let me take you one step back before you go see them. You receive some sort of document or referral for this process, I assume?
We get a court order and a referral and hopefully at least a police report, indictments, warrants, things like that.
Do you recall in this case who you received the referral from?
I believe the referral came from the state's attorney's office.
Okay, from, you remember if it was from Ms. Gropper herself?
I believe
the
so.
District Attorney, Assistant District Attorney, okay. Do you recall when you received that in this case?
It was in 2022.
Do you have your report available to
I
you?
do.
Okay. Can you look on page 1 and see when you received that?
I can tell you when the order was written, but that's not when I get them.
Sure.
It goes through a whole process. But the order was dated September 30th, 2021.
And then you received it, or your office, I guess.
Our offices
DBHDD
received it in May of 2022.
Okay, and I assume there's a process through DBHDD when they get it, and then they assign it to
They assign it to a
psychologist.
region, and then the region assigns it to a
Okay,
psychologist.
so you are assigned to a specific region within DBHDD for these types of evaluations?
I'm not personally, but
Oh.
most people are. I work for the state office, which means I'm a floater. They send me where they need evaluators.
Okay.
So I was working up here in this area for a while. Now I'm over in the east. I just I move around. I'm all over the state.
Okay, all right. So when you get a referral form, does that generally come with, you said you said you hoped you get like an indictment or a police report, but does that referral form come with all of that information, or do you have to reach out to the referring office to obtain those documents?
It's supposed to come with all of that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay. Do you recall in this particular case when you got the file that you started working from, what documents you had at that time?
I don't specifically recall what came originally. I believe I got the investigative summary up front and an evaluation from a privately retained psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And probably an indictment. I don't remember specifically what came.
Okay. Your report, you did 2 different reports in this case, is that
That's
right?
correct.
You did a competency evaluation and a criminal responsibility evaluation, right?
Yes, sir.
And I was going to deal with the difference in that in just a minute. You touched on it a little bit. But what is the difference between a competency evaluation and a criminal responsibility evaluation?
So a competency evaluation is how somebody's doing right at the time you do the evaluation. It's sort of a slice in time. Are they currently able to understand what's happening in court and able to work with their attorney in their own defense? A criminal responsibility evaluation is how the person was doing at the time of the alleged crime. So that answer could be very different depending on how much time has passed. So we have to look back and see what was going on in their life at the time of the crime.
So in this case, the criminal responsibility piece is looking at Ms. Driver around the December 8, 2020 timeframe, correct?
Correct.
And the competency evaluation is looking at her at the time that you conduct that actual evaluation.
That's correct.
Because that is geared towards her case moving forward and whether she can be an assistance with that case and understands what she's going through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, you did the competency evaluation. You found her to be competent to stand trial, ultimately, right? That's not an issue that you're talking about today.
That's correct.
Yeah. When you did that competency evaluation, how long did you spend with her when you conducted that initial interview?
About an hour and 45 minutes.
Okay.
Actually, sorry, that time it was 2 hours and 35
Okay. Yeah.
minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to make sure we were correct. That was in August of 2022. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that was 2 hours and 35 minutes at the Cherokee County Detention Center with Ms. Driver.
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall in that report? Do you have the competency report with you as well?
I do.
I think this is the same for both evaluations, but you listed sources of information that you had in that evaluation. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And you listed several things, including Ms. Driver's, some records from Ms. Driver at the jail, hospital, medical records from her at the jail, correct?
That's correct.
Reviewed her Wellstar Kennestone Hospital records as well.
I did.
Specifically, some handwritten notes that she had made during the course of that stay at the hospital. Is that fair?
That's correct.
You said you had the indictment, a summary report from the City of Canton Police regarding their investigation, and you had a evaluation that had been conducted by a privately retained expert, in this case, Dr. Roberta Ballard, too. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you had the opportunity, I presume, to review all of those things before you went and saw Ms. Driver?
Some things I reviewed before and some things I reviewed after.
Okay.
Like to get her jail records, I had to get her to sign a release of information, so I got that information after.
Okay. Okay. So when you went and met with her in August, she signed a release form for you to obtain the records from the jail.
That's correct.
And you reviewed those after your evaluation?
But before I read the report. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Did you ever reach out to myself or Ms. Trethewey to obtain any additional information that you would need for your evaluation of Ms. Driver on either incident?
I don't recall reaching out to counsel.
Okay. So tell me specifically, when you meet with Ms. Driver, how do you go about discussing these issues with her? I assume there's some sort of rapport you're trying to establish with her so she can be honest with you. Is that fair?
There's sort of a, we'll call it sort of a forensic rapport.
Okay.
There's, we're not overly friendly, but we're obviously, accepting and empathetic. We always start with an advisement of what their rights are. We let them know that it's not confidential. We let them know that they do not have to answer our questions, that they have the right to consult with their attorney, and that anything that they tell us can be included in a report, and we might have to come to court and testify, and that the information can be used at sentencing.
And Ms. Driver had already been through an evaluation with a privately retained psychologist that you were aware of, right?
That's my understanding.
So did she express to you that she understood what this process was going to be like?
She did.
Okay. She didn't have any issues communicating with you about any of the questions you were asking her?
She did not.
So are there any specific types of tests that you do while you're conducting this evaluation, or is it really just talking to her about her experience?
Sometimes there's testing done. I did not do any testing in this case. I spoke with her, I did a clinical interview, I did a competency interview, and then when I went back, I did a criminal responsibility interview.
Would the testing be done more if you believe that there were cognitive issues with Ms. Driver?
If there's cognitive issues, if there's specific concerns that they might be feigning or exaggerating symptoms, if there's comprehension issues, yeah.
Okay.
we would
You did not
testing.
have any concerns about any of those issues as it related to Ms. Driver?
I did not.
Okay. So when you talked to her, do you recall what the first set of topics were about this particular case with Ms. Driver?
About the case or about just in first topic covered in the interview?
Your interview.
Background information.
Okay. And what did you learn about Ms. Driver's background?
I learned that she has sort of an unstable early childhood, that her family moved around and she felt like they were kind of cold, but that she also left the family several times. She left and moved in with boys. She even left the state and moved in with a boy. She had some suicidal ideation early on, some self-injurious behavior, and we're talking about like cutting. She would cut her arms. She, I think, attempted an overdose on sleeping pills. She also abused substances. She started at a young age using marijuana and then cocaine and experimenting with some other drugs as well.
Did you ask her if she'd ever been evaluated or diagnosed as a teenager or earlier on in her childhood?
She stated that when she was younger, she did get some treatment. She saw a doctor. She wasn't sure if it was like her pediatrician or a psychiatrist, but that she did see a doctor who prescribed her some antidepressants early on, but she did not take them.
Okay. And you're not aware of any records or evaluation reports that you've ever seen about her?
I have not seen any documentation of that.
Okay. And after discussing her background, what would your next topic of discussion generally be with an evaluation?
In the competency evaluation, the next step would be to talk to her, well, in both of them, the next step would be to talk to her about her current mental status, how she was doing at the time of the interview.
Okay, so let's skip off the competency evaluation piece. Let's just focus on the criminal responsibility.
So we would do that, the mental status in both evaluations.
Okay. Was there when do you recall doing the second interview with her regarding the criminal responsibility piece?
It was about a month later, in September of 2022.
And was there a difference in Ms. Driver's personality when she met with you both in August and September?
In August, she was upbeat. She described herself as being excited. She talked about not really sleeping and having a lot of projects she was working on in the jail. She said she was annoying her roommates by singing and dancing and doing gymnastics. So she was really very upbeat the first time I spoke to her. When I returned a month later, she showed signs that she had been crying before she came into the meeting. She was disheveled. Her hair wasn't done. Her jail clothing was disheveled, and she expressed sadness and feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness.
Are those symptoms, or those signs of things that you saw from her just in her personality to you, are they things that you would pick up on in the nature of your evaluation of her?
That's pretty much the purpose of the mental status exam, is to look for things like that, because they can show sadness and feelings of hopelessness, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of being persecuted, sleeping too much or sleeping too little, changes in appetite, changes in activity level, change in the rate at which people speak, the rate at which they move. All of that can be suggestive of a depressed state, of being in an episode of depression. And then the other end, the being excited, not sleeping at all, having a lot of projects, really being in, a lot of people really love being that way because they get things done. They have a lot of things that they can do, and they have a lot of energy, and they don't feel like they need to sleep, so they'll stay up for days on end without getting any sleep, and that would be a sign of mania or hypomania, which is sort of a subclinical level of mania.
Okay. Part of the sources that you were reviewing in this case, including her records from the jail, is that fair?
Yes.
And those records included evidence regarding medication that she was taking?
That's correct.
Can you describe the medication that she was on while she was in the jail at that point in time? Or even from when she came into the jail until you met with her?
So they actually changed her medications a lot. They tried different things, and she frequently said she didn't want to be taking any medications at all, and she would refuse the medication. So the medications were adjusted and changed and moved around a lot. When she first came in, she was taking medications to address mood, she was taking medications to address anxiety, and she was taking medications to address symptoms of psychosis, like hearing things, seeing things that aren't really there, disorganized thoughts, things like that.
Can you describe specifically the medication that she was on? Do you recall?
Can I refer to my notes?
Absolutely, yes.
So when she first came in, she was exhibiting signs of depressed mood, hopelessness, suicidal ideation, and labile affect, which is how you present your mood, the outward expressions of emotion, and labile means that it moves up and down. So she had shifting moods, shifting emotions. So they were looking at a possible unspecified psychosis, according to the records. So she was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant, Visceral, which is actually an antihistamine, but it's given for anxiety, and Zyprexa, which is an antipsychotic.
And that is, you said that was when she first initially was in the jail. Were those symptoms that she was being observed with in the jail, were they consistent with the, I guess, diagnosis or impressions that the medical staff at Kennestone had of her when she was at the hospital?
So my medical records, I believe, from Kennestone were incomplete.
Okay.
I only had about 118 pages from Kennestone Hospital, and there was only one psychiatric report in that file that I had.
Okay.
And at the time of that evaluation, she was sedated and did not give any information.
Okay, so that didn't really give you any information.
So I didn't
at all.
really have any information about her mental health from the hospital. So
Okay.
I started from the jail.
And so from the initial arrival at the jail and the description you just gave of her mood and her conditions that she was showing, how did that change over the course of the next months while she was incarcerated?
She continued to express a lot of paranoid ideation, thinking people are out to get her, out to harm her, talking about her behind her back. She also expressed a lot of what we call delusions of reference, which is when you see something that's sort of innocuous and you interpret it as having some special meaning to you. So a lot of people will say, oh, I was getting a message from the TV or the radio, like it was talking directly to me. Not that I was hearing what they were saying, but there was something underlying it, a coded message that was just for them. Other people will think that they're getting instructions from people's facial expressions, body language, objects, and things like that. So she was describing getting a lot of coded messages from sounds she heard, things that facial expressions of people in the jail, that she was doing something wrong, that she shouldn't be there, things like that.
Those records, those reports that you're referencing, those are things that she was telling you about in the course of your evaluation too, is that right?
Those are things she told to the jail staff, that the jail staff documented in their records, and she also told me very similar things.
Okay. And in conducting your evaluation, that is one of the things that you are trying to look at in terms of the consistency of what she is telling, not just yourself, but other people that she's interacting with. Is that fair?
Yes, consistency, and especially if there's if it's detailed. So you look at if somebody says something really vague and then it changes. That is something that we are concerned that they might be making it up because they can't remember more detailed things to share over time. So that's very vague. And if they do try to use something that's detailed, then the details might change over time. So we look for both of those things.
Okay. And for an example, you noted this in your report that that she said to you that people are communicating with me through their body language and I'm not supposed to be here. Is that one of the things you recall her saying to you directly?
Yes, she said that in terms of how she was feeling in the jail, but she also said that she had felt those things before as well.
Okay. Before the incident date?
That's correct.
Okay. Did she talk to you about how long she had been feeling those paranoias, those concerns about how she was seeing and hearing things?
She told me that that actually started a long time ago when she was a teenager, and that she was feeling sort of a more generalized paranoia. She didn't give me details about what kind of thoughts she had as a teenager in terms of the paranoia. She also talked about having sort of magical thinking, which is when it's sort of the opposite of delusions of reference. So magical thinking is when you think that there's something about you that can control the world, even though there's no real connection. So she talked about being able to read minds and things like that and having a spiritual awakening. And that occurred prior to when she met her husband, but while she was using illicit substances as a teenager. And then she went off illicit substances, and I don't know whether she continued to experience delusions in between going off and when this occurred, but she said that the symptoms became particularly bad approximately 2 to 3 months before the alleged crime.
And why was that?
I think there's sort of a confluence of events. I think she started to feel worse. She suggested that she was starting to sort of question some of the things that she was being taught. And started to feel a little bit paranoid and was starting to experience those delusions of references. She was starting to see things and making them think that she needed to hurt herself, that she wasn't supposed to be in the universe, she wasn't supposed to be in the world. And that she reached out to her family, the family she was living with, and wasn't able to get help and was instead given CBD oil. And that once she started taking the CBD oil, that there was a big jump. She felt like it was very potent. That's how she felt. And that her paranoia and delusions of reference and magical thinking all increased sort of significantly and sharply after starting to take that drug.
Okay. Now, I'm going to kind of get to the CBD specifically. One of the things that you diagnosed her with was cannabis use disorder. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And is that based on the CBD that she was taking?
Yes, she believed it had THC. Now I have no idea what was in the cannabis oil she was taking.
Right.
But she believed that it was intoxicating, and she continued to take it, and it was causing her significant distress.
Did she explain to you that the CBD that she was using was being given to her by the husband in her life, Mr. Ben Michael?
She did. She indicated that she had ordered some online, but that Mr. Ben Michael, I've been calling him Mr. Joyce, so I'll try and whatever is most consistent.
We've got 3 different names for it,
yeah, so
we're
it's hard to keep up.
clear.
But she said that he did not want her to use the commercial one, so he brought her one that was produced by a friend or brought to him by a friend. She didn't really know the source.
Okay. So what she was using was one that had been, what she told you she'd been using was one that had been provided by a third party, not the stuff that she ordered.
Correct.
Okay. Is it fair, Dr. Garrett, that the use of substances, illicit substances specifically, can influence or increase someone's paranoia and delusions?
Yes. And even illicit and even legal drugs can do that. Anything that has sort of an intoxicating effect can negatively impact somebody's symptoms. So if you have, and cannabis is sort of well known for being something that causes people who don't have mental illness to have some level of paranoia. And so the addition of cannabis to somebody who has a pre-existing paranoia can increase, it can sort of ratchet that up and make that worse.
And your belief that the symptoms that she was reflecting to you in her earlier years, her teenage years, were those caused by her mental health situation, or were those caused more by drug use?
It's difficult to say.
Okay.
It was a long time ago, so self-report is not hugely reliable for things that happened that long ago. But the way it usually works is either a substance can trigger an underlying mental health condition, can cause a new mental health condition, or can be a way of trying to medicate a condition that already exists. So those are the most common ways that we see, early mental health and substance use interact.
Okay.
Which one of those was at play in this case, I couldn't tell you for sure.
Now, you are familiar with the dynamic in which Ms. Driver was living during this incident that we're talking about in this case. Is that right?
Based on her descriptions.
Yes. Was that also information that you learned through other sources in this case?
There was some information included in witness statements given to the police that were summarized in the investigative summary.
Okay. And I don't want you to talk about anything that the specific people said, but you're aware she was living in a polygamous or polyamorous relationship with Mr. Ben Michael, right? There were multiple wives in their relationship. That's something that you were aware of?
Yes, she told me there was another woman before her, but that she left, and that she went with Mr. Ben Michael, and then 2 other women joined later.
Okay. Did she describe to you, did Ms. Driver specifically describe to you the nature of how her relationship with Mr. Ben Michael was in the beginning and how it developed over the, about three years she was with him?
She described meeting him when she was 16 years old, sitting at a bus station, I believe, and that she found him charming and intelligent and engaging, and he gave her his contact information, and about a year later, when she was 17, she reached out to him, and he accepted her in, and they began a romantic relationship at that point when he was 38 or 39 years old.
Does the age discrepancy between Mr. Ben Michael and Ms. Driver at that time, did that cause you concern, or did that play into your consideration of her evaluation?
Yeah, it was one of several factors. Between her sort of unstable childhood, the sort of push and pull with her parents, returning to her parents, leaving her parents, things like that, her substance abuse and her young age all made her, in my view, particularly susceptible to wanting to be with somebody who's older and willing to take her in and protect her and things like that. So I felt like that may have been a factor in why she chose to join this group.
Okay. Did she describe to you the nature of the relationship she had with Mr. Ben Michael early on when they met?
A little bit, not a lot. She did indicate that he got her off all drugs, that she was supposed to be very clean and was not able to use drugs anymore, that she tried marijuana one time at a drug circle and got in quite a bit of trouble for it, and then never did anymore again until a couple months before this incident. And that she basically described, him being a partner, that it was good, and that she believed the things he told her, and that she accepted the lifestyle.
And she accepted the lifestyle when the other 2 women came in to that group. Is that
That's my understanding. We didn't talk about that in any kind of detail. She did not express any dissatisfaction with their presence. She talked about them being there, but she didn't say anything positive or negative about it.
Okay. And at some point in time, they had a child. Mr. Ben Michael and Ms. Driver had a child together.
That's correct.
The Hannah in the context of this case, right? Was Ms. Driver ever able to explain to you any difference in their relationship once the child became involved?
I think she started to become more concerned about having a normal life for her child once she had a child. She was concerned that there was no prenatal health care, that there was no birth certificate, that there was no social security, that there were no vaccines. And she described to me sort of feeling like she was concerned that her baby wouldn't get a normal life.
Okay. Stability is something that she was looking at?
It seemed that way.
Okay. You were aware that their living arrangement, they didn't maintain a set home.
She described them as nomadic.
Yes. Going back to the medication issue with Ms. Driver, your records that you reviewed while she was at the jail, you said that they tried her on different medications at various times. Is that common when trying to treat someone with mental health illnesses?
To a certain degree, there was more fluctuation in hers than I would normally expect to see. Whenever you give somebody a medication, you don't know, everybody responds to medications differently. So they start at a low level and they increase, and if there are side effects, they may try a different medication, and then they have to start over again at a low level and increase up to a therapeutic level. Symptoms may change, they may have to address different things as things go along, they may have to add a new medication in to address any kind of side effects. So there's always some adjustment. In Ms. Driver's case, there was more because she did not believe in taking medications and did not want to take medications, so she would get better, and as soon as she was better, she would say, well, I don't want medications, I don't need medications. And they would try to explain to her, the reason you're feeling better now is because you're on medication. But she didn't want to take them, so she was taking them sporadically and consistently, and they would lower the dosage to make it less impactful on her mental state. And then they would have to change it again because her symptoms would flare up. There would be a change in her symptoms after that.
Is that common generally for people that have mental health illnesses, have issues with them taking medication?
Yes.
Is it common for people with mental health issues to basically believe that they're okay. They don't recognize their own issues.
That's actually a symptom of schizophrenia. Yeah.
Right. And I guess more particularly so in the case for Ms. Driver, excuse me, who had a lifestyle leading up to this circumstance of not wanting to take pharmaceutical medication at all, right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And further than that, someone that is not taking medication consistently and refusing to cooperate with that treatment plan, that can further, I guess, delay the ability to get treatment for those particular illnesses. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And did you see that in Ms. Driver in this case?
There was some indication of that because whenever she would reduce her medications or go off her medications, her symptoms would become more evident. And she was on suicide watch several times for long periods of time. She had to be restrained because of self-harm behaviors and put in strapped into a chair. They have a restraint chair that they can kind of roll around, and they had to put her in one of those because she was hurting herself.
Okay. What ultimately did you diagnose Ms. Driver with in this case?
Schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, and the cannabis use.
And we talked a little bit about that, so let's focus more directly on the schizoaffective disorder. What is that? Can you describe that for the jury, please?
Schizoaffective disorder is, a lot of people know about schizophrenia, so it's schizophrenia plus mood. Schizophrenia is when somebody has thoughts that are different than other people. Or perceptions that are different from other people. So they may see things that aren't really there, or they may hear things that when there's nothing to hear. They may smell things that aren't there. They may feel things walking on their skin or feel things in their body. So those are hallucinations. They may have delusions, which are fixed false beliefs that persist even in the face of contrary evidence. And that's usually not just, these conspiracy theories are bound these days, right? Everybody's got a theory about things. Those you can see how they developed, you can see what they're based on. When you're talking about a delusion, it's something more than that. It's when there's really no other explanation for their belief other than that they have a mental illness. So a lot of times it takes people are out to get me, people are out to harm me, or I have special powers, I can fly, I can see things, I'm smarter than everybody else. I spoke to one gentleman who was positive that he was the president of Mars. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at with schizophrenia. Plus you also get disorganized thinking. So they may change subjects without any indication of why. They may start out talking about the sky is blue, and then when the sky is blue, the leaves are green, and then the leaves die, and you end up talking about death. There's like these very loose associations between what they talk about, or they kind of flow off onto some different track, and it's hard to get them back. So that's sort of the disorganized thinking portion of schizophrenia. So when it's schizoaffective disorder, you've got the hallucinations, delusions, and thought disorder, plus problems with your mood, depression, mania, and sometimes both. Sometimes they go back and forth. Sometimes it's just one or the other.
And what about the borderline personality disorder? How does that play in?
Borderline personality disorder is sort of a lifetime thing. It's characterological. Oftentimes it's triggered by some sort of trauma or some sort of feeling of abandonment in early childhood, but it's a pattern of behavior that starts in adolescence and continues throughout their life, whether in school, at work, at home. It's a consistent part of who they are. And it involves things like unstable relationships. So like Ms. Driver talked about having sort of a push and pull with her parents. She'd go back to her parents, she'd leave her parents, she'd go back to her parents, leave her parents. That is sort of indicative of an unstable relationship. It's also an unstable sense of self. So you might one minute think, oh no, I'm a good person. I'm a great person. I do good things. And then the next minute you might think, I am horrible. I'm a terrible person. And they hold all of this sort of at the same time. So it's they call it a dialectic, where you try and hold these things, and that's sort of a big word, and I don't even know why I used it, but you try and hold all of this stuff inside, and it leads to aggravation, anger, impulsivity, and one of sort of the characteristics is sort of this need to hold on tightly to people in your life. They call it frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. And that's something that was even noted in the jail records when other people in jail when Ms. Driver started experiencing people in jail was sort of rejecting her or being critical of her, she would get suicidal and self-harming. That's that kind of thing we're looking at, where people will do whatever they can to keep people from leaving them. And so all of that sort of comes together to make a very unstable interaction both with themselves and with the world.
Now, in this particular case, were you aware that Ms. Driver had continued to have contact with Mr. Benyamin while she was in custody?
I had heard that occurred, yes.
Is that something that would be a consistent symptom of someone that has borderline personality disorder, as you just described it?
Yes, in my opinion it is.
Okay. Would that be more particularly heightened in a situation like this, where she viewed him as a the leader of this group, this cult type of religious foundational group.
That plus just sort of the general stress that was in her life, all of those can increase that kind of thing.
Okay. Now, these diagnoses that you made, they are based on actual psychological findings through medical journals. Is that accurate?
There's a criteria that has been set out in the Diagnostic Statistic Manual that lays out all of the well-researched and defined different kinds of disorders and what their specific criteria is to meet those.
And what are we up to now in the DSM-5?
The DSM-5 TR, the text revision.
Okay.
So it's right after 5.
All right. And those, I presume as a clinician or even as a forensic psychologist, you interview someone, you make notes of everything you see, and you go back to the DSM guidelines just to review and make sure, all right, do I think this person meets this particular diagnosis? Is that fair?
Yeah, there's sort of an interplay. You go and we study the book, right? So we know generally what we can sort of, we'll get triggered when somebody says something or does something. We'll go, okay, that reminds me of X, Y, Z. So then you would ask them more questions because you want to see if it meets. And then you take everything back and yes, you pull up the diagnostic criteria and you walk through, does she meet? Because there's like a whole list of criteria. And they have to meet some of them, but not all of them because nobody is the same. Everybody is different. And so you look at all of them and you see where do we have signs that she meets that criteria and where is that supported by other sources as well.
Now, you have talked a little bit throughout your testimony about confirming that someone isn't making it up.
Yes.
I think in the medical parlance they call it malingering.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. Malingering is one. That's an intentional fabrication of symptoms or an intentional exaggeration of symptoms specifically for the purpose of secondary gain. But we also have to be aware that not everybody's, secondary gain is hard to prove and hard to demonstrate. So you're also looking for just, are they exaggerating for whatever reason because it's their personality to exaggerate? Are they exaggerating everything? So just because somebody is malingering or feigning or exaggerating one thing doesn't mean they don't have a mental illness. Doesn't mean they aren't being honest about other things. So you really have to parse all of that out.
And you took steps in your evaluation to determine if you believed that she was either faking it or malingering or anything that would.
I didn't do any testing, but I did pay attention to that. That was something that I seriously considered.
Does that go back to the idea of her consistency with the statement she was giving you in both of your interviews you conducted?
Yes.
Is it also fair to say that you were able to evaluate that based on not only what she told you, but what she had told Dr. Ballard in the reports that she conducted?
I didn't look too carefully at what she told Dr. Ballard, so I couldn't testify about what she told Dr. Ballard, but generally speaking, my recollection was that it was very consistent, and it was consistent with what was in the reports from the jail.
All right, so you had jail records that were indicating those same ideas and symptoms, correct?
Correct.
You had at least a report from Dr. Ballard which drew similar conclusions that you looked at and reviewed, right?
Yes.
And you obviously had your own evaluations that you conducted of her over 2 different periods of time.
Yes.
And you spent about 4 hours and 15 minutes by my calculation with her over the course of 2 times. Is that fair?
About that, yeah.
Do you believe that that's a fair time frame to spend with someone when conducting forensic evaluations such as this?
It's more than we usually do.
Okay. Can you explain, I think you talked about it a little bit, can you explain the delusional compulsions and what delusions are specifically?
So I talked about delusions a little bit already, but they are a fixed false belief that is held even if you have evidence to the contrary, and is so unusual that it couldn't be justified. It couldn't be explained by any other reason other than there's something wrong with the way the person's thinking. A delusional compulsion is when a person, if their delusion had been real, then it would have justified their conduct.
Can you give us an example of a delusion generally that you see frequently in your line of work?
There's so many. A lot of them have to do with, I saw a gentleman who believed that his family members had been replaced with imposters, that they looked like his family members and they talked like his family members, but he actually believed that there were aliens inside there, like pod people, I guess. He believed that they had taken over his parents' appearance and bodies to harm him.
And what specifically in Ms. Driver's case can you point to as some examples of delusions that she was dealing with?
So she talked generally about paranoia, that everybody was ganging up against her, everybody is talking about her, everybody is out to get her in some way. She talked about on sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, sort of a grandiose delusion that she had special powers and special skills. And that started back when she was a teen, with believing that she could read minds and that people could read her mind and things like that. It continued with this sort of magical thinking that things that she did could impact the world. So if she, walked the right way, talked the right way, breathed the right way, then it would be good for the world. If she walked the wrong way, breathed the wrong way, talked the wrong way, that it could be bad for the world. And that's sort of she also talked about delusions of reference, which I also talked about before, thinking that thinking that somebody's facial expression, that they were giving them a specific message and not like a "I don't like you" message, like, because when people glare at you, we all do that, right? But she's talking more about somebody would talk about death in a completely different context. And she interpreted that as they're telling me specifically that I have to kill myself, that kind of thing. She would see a knife just lying out in somebody's kitchen where it's supposed to be. And she would see that, and she would interpret that as, that's a sign that I need to kill myself. Kill myself and my baby, cut somebody, cut my throat. So she had a lot of that was going back at least a month or two before this actually happened.
And you were able to observe or identify those delusions based on what Ms. Driver was telling you, number one, right?
Yeah.
And also, you were seeing that from some collateral sources in this case based on statements made in the investigative summary from the police department.
That's correct. And she said it to the jail.
Yes. So, for example, if she was, like an example of a delusion to her could be a fellow inmate at the jail saying that her grandmother died, she could interpret as a statement to her that she needed to kill herself.
She could. That's not one of the ones she specifically mentioned. She mentioned being at a 12 Tribes event where they were talking or preaching about being accepting of death, and she interpreted that as the sign that it was time.
And are you aware that she went to a 12 Tribes event the morning of December?
Yeah, that's the one she was speaking of.
Yeah, she was specifically telling you about that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you described what delusions are and what delusional compulsion are. Did you believe that Ms. Driver was suffering from delusional compulsions during this time frame?
I believe she was experiencing delusions.
Okay. You were aware that she was reporting issues and evidence of domestic violence, is that right?
Yes, sir.
You were aware there was an incident about 10 days before the December 8th incident of report with law enforcement in North Carolina where she had a black eye? Were you aware of that?
I was aware that she had a black eye when she went to see her mother.
Yes. You saw that source in the information that you were provided that her mom reported the black eye to law enforcement.
I believe so. I don't have a specific memory though.
Okay. Are you aware that there was a time frame? Did Ms. Driver tell you about a time frame with which Mr. Benjamin, or Mr. Ben Michael rather, took their child from her and had her away from her for a period of time?
She did.
Okay. Did she talk about how that affected her mental state? Did that add things to your evaluation with her?
She talked about that in terms of why she went back to him. That she had called her parents, texted with her parents, and asked them to come pick her and Hannah up, but that she used it from a phone that's monitored by Mr. Benjamin, and that he discovered those messages and came and took Hannah away from her before she could go. That her parents did come get her, but only got her. And that he was telling her that she would never see her daughter again if she didn't come back, so she returned back.
Okay. She talked to you about the nature of how she felt about her child, right?
A little bit, but not that much.
Did she tell you things about how she felt like she was downloading herself with Hannah when she breastfed?
She did. She talked about that she believed that she was downloading her sins or the bad parts about her into her child through breastfeeding. She also talked about pouring her sin into the child. And I believe there was a statement, report from Mr. Benjamin to the police that was described in the investigative report that she called Hannah, that Hannah was no longer her child but was a sin. And so there was a lot of evidence that she really believed that by having a child with somebody who was married, by having a child in this sort of open relationship, that it was a sin, and that she passed that sin on to her daughter, and so they shared that they were both embodiments of sin.
Okay, and you specifically indicated in your report that she believed that she needed to take her own life because of those delusions. Is that fair to say?
That was my impression, yes.
Okay.
that and everything in the world was telling her to. So it wasn't just about the belief about sin, it was those delusions of reference that she was experiencing both before, during, and after, everything was telling her that she needed to do this in her mind.
Okay, Judge, can I have one? These delusions that Ms. Driver was experiencing, do you believe that they go beyond what Mr. Joyce was trying to teach her with respect to their belief system?
I do. I mean, there were certainly things that she talked about that aligned with the things that he taught her, but there are several reasons why I don't think that the ones that were really leading up to this were actually part of that religious belief, mostly because she started questioning those religious beliefs, and then she started getting a lot of distress about it. And while the beliefs, the magical thinking parts, that she could impact the world, that may have been something that she learned from Mr. Benyamin, but the delusions of reference, those are different. Those are something else that, as far as what I've seen and what I've been told so far, is not a part of their religious beliefs. That everything's telling you need to die is not part of it, as far as I've seen. The other reason I don't believe that it's entirely just what she's been taught is that she was having delusions before she ever even met him. And so you take somebody who's vulnerable, who's young, who's already delusional, who's already using drugs, and you bring them in and you start teaching them this stuff. A sane, stable person might start to believe it, maybe, but a person who has a personality disorder and a delusional disorder and a substance use disorder, you're teaching them something that increases those problems as opposed to decreasing those problems. So if she started out, that's sort of her baseline. And she started out as vulnerable and delusional and was only made worse by this. So while it may be consistent, that doesn't mean that's all it is.
Without her receiving any medical treatment during that period of time, and particularly the months leading up to this incident, is it fair to say that her situation would only get worse?
That would be my assumption, yes.
Yeah. This is not, what you diagnosed her with, this is not like being diagnosed with the common cold or the flu that you can...
It's not going to go away by itself, no.
Right. This takes medical treatment in terms of pharmaceuticals, therapy, a whole host of things. Is that
all
fair
of
to
those
say?
things, yes.
And will be something that Ms. Driver has to address for the rest of her natural life?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
It may be episodic. It can come and go. People get on medications and they do better, and they have treatment and they do better. But even with the treatment, it can still come back. And then you need to adjust your treatment. People can sort of learn to tolerate psychiatric medications just like they can learn to tolerate drugs. So you need to constantly be vigilant and aware of the things that are the early signs so that you can make changes before things get bad. And that's not really something people with schizoaffective disorder are good at.
Particularly, as you've seen in the jail record, someone that's not consistently taking her medication, right?
Right.
There were other indications that, or Ms. Driver, did she talk to you about how she was attempting, you said she was attempting to, I guess, not believe some of the following and teachings that Mr. Joyce had, but was there also indications that she was trying to leave that setting with her child?
She told me she tried to leave multiple times. She talked about one incident. She really only talked about two in particular, but one of them was an incident where she ran out in the street and tried to flag down a motorist. And the other one was when she called her parents and tried to get the parents to come pick her up and take her home to Tennessee. Were
you aware that her relationship with her parents was somewhat isolated by this group setting?
My understanding from the things that Ms. Driver told me was that she was incredibly isolated from everybody outside of the little family that they made, that she was not allowed to speak to other people unless they were trying to recruit them, that she wasn't allowed to go into stores or spend money or use a phone without being supervised. She wasn't allowed to have a job unless they really needed it. So she only had like 2 jobs in her life, and they were about like 2 weeks long or something like that. A motel, I think, like cleaning up motel rooms or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But so she was very isolated. The only people in her life were the people that the family, the group, the cult, whatever you want to call them, allowed allowed her to be access to in her descriptions.
Did she tell you that when she would have occasions to talk with her parents, that frequently, or even all the time, that Mr. Ben Michael was there listening to her phone calls?
That they were monitored? Yes,
Yeah.
she did tell me that.
And that he would frequently monitor her text messages and communications with anybody through her phone. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think you said it earlier, but your clinical opinion is that someone who was already in a state of paranoia and experiencing delusions prior to that type of environment, that type of living situation would likely enhance that tenfold.
Yeah, at least over time. It may at the beginning because the borderline personality disorder, she may have really liked that close control at first, but over time, without any kind of treatment and things like that for her delusions and things like that, yes. And then I think it got worse with the baby because she started to realize that maybe the baby needs something different, and started to question things. And then the CBD happened, and I think that all just sort of triggered a decompensation, is what we call it, when your symptoms get worse. That she decompensated at least starting in September of 2020 and just continued to go down and was not able to get the treatment that she needed.
As jury has heard from one witness in this case that was with Ms. Driver during the course of that time, a man named Jason Spillers. You were not privy to his testimony. You'll probably thank yourself for that in some ways. He described Ms. Driver as going in and out of basically what he called catatonic states at times.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's consistent with someone that's dealing with schizoaffective disorders?
I think that, yeah, it could be. And it's hard to say what would have caused that. She told me about one of those as well.
Okay.
She told me that I believe it was on Hannah's birthday that she went into a catatonic state. She said that she felt like it was more the magical thinking. She said that her brother had been shot and that she felt like that she somehow caused it, that it was somehow her fault, even though he was in Florida and they were up in Connecticut. And that she couldn't move, she couldn't breathe, she couldn't eat, she couldn't do things because she was afraid that it would have a catastrophic effect of some sort. She didn't have a specific thing that she said would happen, except that she was afraid she'd never be able to touch her daughter again, was one thing she mentioned. And that she did not get up until Mr. Joyce, what is
Ben
the
Michael,
Ben Michael?
Joyce. You can call him Steve if you'd like.
Sort of forced her to get up. I think she said that he poured water on her, that he kicked her, that he set Hannah on her chest to try and make her get up, and that she eventually did get up, but that she was still in sort of a depressive state, and she was very unhappy about looking like crap and going down and having pictures taken with a family and things like that. And then she also started to talk about some delusional thoughts she had about photographs and people taking photographs so that they could download you back into that point in time, and that sort of it would create. And this is something I've heard from other people as well. This is not as unusual as it might sound, but that by taking a photograph of somebody, you sort of create, I don't know, like anybody back up their hard drives and you create a picture of what happened at that time. So if anything goes wrong, you can go back to that. That's sort of what she was describing, that by taking a picture, he could then, if she died, download her back into that same spot, which she found to be very distressing.
Just one final question, Dr. Garrett. There's we're going to hear from Dr. Ballard later, so I don't want to put words in your mouth about what findings she made in her report, but is it fair to say that your belief that she met these DSM diagnoses as far as schizoaffective disorder, bipolar, is that consistent with what you saw in Dr. Ballard's report as well?
I believe so, but I don't remember specifically what the opinions or diagnoses Dr. Ballard made.
Is it also fair to say that experts such as yourself, particularly in the field of psychology, can have disagreements about someone's diagnosis?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just people. We do our best. We can make mistakes. We can interpret things differently. And that's not even necessarily a mistake. People interpret things differently. And then there's also a lot of gray area. So you might say, well, she doesn't have schizoaffective disorder. She's got bipolar disorder with psychotic features. It's the same factors. It's the same symptoms, just they align a little bit differently. So people may disagree on whether it's this one or that one, or whether it's an unspecified psychotic disorder because it seems a little different than your normal psychotic disorder, which could be impacted by lifestyle and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of room for different ways of interpreting, different ways of seeing evidence, and everything has to come from a human as well. So we get our information. Ms. Driver is a human. The people at the jail who took down notes about what she did are humans. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody interprets things through their own lens. So yes, there is room for disagreement.
But your final conclusion is that she definitely suffered from these disorders that you have diagnosed her with, and was.
I am confident that she was experiencing delusions. I'm confident that those delusions included paranoia, delusions of reference, and magical thinking. She also reported auditory and visual hallucinations, and she also described and exhibited both depressive mood and sort of hypomanic manic mood, that I was able to see both sides of that coin. So yes, there may be different ways of arriving at what the actual name of the diagnosis is, but I am confident in the symptoms that I observed and documented.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
All right, we're going to take a recess before cross-examination, and I'm going to let you be in recess for 15 minutes. That'll be back in the jury room at 5 till 11. Leave us your notepads. Don't talk about the case. You can step outside if you'd like.